Today, interesting things happening today. A lot of events. One thing that everybody should be aware of is, of course, the Q board is back up over at the new 8chan, and Q Plus, we're back. So that's kind of a fun, cool thing, and I'm sure we'll get all sorts of new information here shortly. It is interesting. You probably remember that last month, and quite some time ago, actually, I had anticipated and predicted that it would be the 17th of October that Q would be back. And I think I was the first one that was really saying that anywhere, and that is what happened. So that was kind of a fun little factoid. I don't know that it means anything, but it's kind of a fun thing to hit it on the numbers there. One of the things that stands out today, President Trump is going to be speaking there in Dallas. Nobody who in this country, anywhere in the world really, can ignore the significance of Dallas historically. And there's all sorts of stress and tension out there. There's people talking about President Kennedy's assassination there in Dallas, and Trump coming back, and these implied threats. I don't know if there are people, or if you saw, Linda, that people have looked at the James Comey tweet a few days ago with his little Star Wars toys and the green pillow beside it, and speculated that that was an allegory to the grassy knoll. Vice President Biden, in his talk during the Democrat debate the other day, and mentioning 17 and then stopping and losing his way and having to go somewhere else as though he said something he might not have wanted to say. The Q17, the 17th, the location of Dallas. And, part of my thought there that I think at least should be out there in people's thoughts in your audience, why did President Trump want to agree to do this rally on this day in Dallas? And what's the significance of that? Was that just the next city? Or was there some subliminal message that was intended? Not even just for other citizens or people like your audience, Linda, but for the deep state, the bad guys. We're coming back to Dallas. We're taking our country back. In the modern era here in our country, the hinge event where the coup, went a different way in many people's minds is Dallas, when President Kennedy was slain. James Comey does this tweet with Star Wars characters, and they're positioned by this green pillow, and there's been people that have speculated that it was kind of an allegory to the grassy knoll. Obviously, President Trump, has had this scheduled speech he's doing tonight in Dallas for quite some time. The whole symbology of Dallas is the location where the coup went to a whole new level. Is pretty hard to argue with. So what's going on here? Why did the president want to be in Dallas that day? Why are these people focused on Dallas this day? The Q team is back on the 17th, the Q number, 17. I would propose to your audience that this is a hinge day. This is a hinge moment. That this is where we make the big turn. And that is not lost on the deep state players. The deep state's very cued into the numbers themselves. Their actions are done around certain numbers, which have numerical meaning. And I know I lose a lot of people when we go to the numbers and everything else, but it's the hidden language. It is the language of Washington, D.C. It is the language of these other cities. It goes past the verbal spoken language. The numbers are universal. to do the armistice, the end of the war, at the 11th hour? Why not do it at midnight, at 6 in the morning, the second they agreed to it? They had to do it at the 11th hour of the day because the 11th was critical. It was part of the magic. It was part of the symbology. Dallas, when President Kennedy was slain, 11/22 of 63. The 22 breaks down to a double 11. And so you had an 11/11/11 once again. Even the beginning of what we consider to be World War I. When did World War I start? When Prince Ferdinand was killed in his car, was assassinated in his car. And so it's been noted as just a curiosity that the license plate number on Prince Ferdinand's car was 111-118. And that can be broken down to an 11/11 of 18. Well, that's the end of the war. Was there just a happenstance that was there in his car? Or are these people who are slaves to the numbers, were they coding in at the very beginning the day that the war would end, World War I would end, from the start? Go back, Linda, you did several really great videos talking about Albert Pike and the Masons. And Albert Pike, in his book Morals and Dogma, talks extensively about the fact that in order for their movement to achieve a new global world order, to take control of the earth, that it would take 3 world wars. And he, wasn't hiding that was the plan. He said very precisely that the entity that they serve is Lucifer, and nobody should be mistaken. Now, certainly, I know Masons who believe that they're doing good works, they're doing things for God, wonderful, nice things. They even meet in the basements of churches and rent facilities at these churches. But the reality is, the devil hides right there in plain sight. And anybody that thinks that the devil isn't infiltrating churches, Lucifer isn't infiltrating these spiritual centers, isn't paying attention. He's been doing that all along, right there in plain sight. Every steeple on every church is an obelisk, and that's Egyptian symbology for Osiris. So these churches were infiltrated a very long time ago with symbology that has nothing to do with anything Christian. I would contend that we'll know that we've actually changed the world radically in the spiritual world when churches decide to pull the spires down off of their churches and get rid of that Egyptian symbology that, for all the wrong reasons, was included in their architecture because people didn't recognize this influence for what it truly was. The devil's laughing. Yeah. Lucifer's laughing. And so until we recognize these hidden ploys, their symbology, their numbers, we're slaves to them. They're laughing at us. One of the things that I think is important at this critical time is to recognize just how they're slaves to the numbers, and it's a tell for us. We can see that there's certain things that they're trying to do, want to do, locked into those numbers. 9/11. 9/11 could not have happened on 9/12. Could not have happened on 9/10 and had the same illusion, allegory, impact, because for decades before the event, they had been coding in 9/11 and the emergency number. symbology of 9/11 had been put into the social network, the psyche of not just the U.S., but the world. If you go to symbology in the Catholic Church, IXXI has been coded into their architecture for 1,000 years. And what's the relevance of it? Well, that arguably is the true birth date of Christ, 3 BC. 9/11, it was associated with a celestial event, the alignment of the stars in a very specific way. Same thing on 9/11, 2001. That exact time of the day was when we had the celestial alignment. And then all of the symbology around the Twin Towers. The Twin Towers, two buildings with 4 square foundations. This whole breaking the 8 ceremony that I talk about from time to time, when the veil between spiritual and physical is broken. This breaking the 8 ceremony that goes back to Egyptian ceremonies and symbology. This knocking down of the buildings or breaking the veil between the spirit realm and the physical realm. For these occultists that have captured governments around the world, this is huge. This is how their magic is locked in for them to prevail and win the earth. If you understand that there's a dark master, a dark knight, a Lucifer behind this, the devil himself, then you realize that with this just a step below divine intelligence, that just as God has meaning in numbers, we see the Bible codes, the codes and the letters that's a hidden thumbprint of God in some of these scriptures. We see that, and it's an identifier that God's behind it. But the devil tries to mimic. He copies. He doesn't do anything original. Everything he does is a copy. So he's mimicking it, and his followers are mimicking that in their use of the numbers to try to imprint these events with numerical precision. Most people have no clue. Very few people in the world would even know that before there was 9/11, there was another event that would have been just as alarming to the world, and that it was coded in on the numbers. In fact, following the Kennedy assassination, these global powers wanted to create the basis for this conflict that would lead to the Third World War. When they let me go back to the World War I symbology with the 11-11-11. If we say that they had a plan and that even the beginning and the end of World War I were date-coded, number-coded, and by the way, anybody that doesn't think that God wants anything to do with these numbers, etc., and that's not a Christian thing and we're not paying attention, well, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Oh, yeah. 4, the 4th book of the Bible, the foundation, book of Numbers. There's a reason why these things are there. And for those that want to pay closer attention, there's value in understanding and identifying how the enemy works. Knowing how your enemy thinks is part of the ability to be able to take him out. So, going back to World War I with this 11-11-11, the other thing I would contend for your audience, Linda, is why is that 11-11-11 so critical? Why did it have to be in the Kennedy assassination, 11 of 22, to give it power and strength to 3 times the power of a spell is the maximum power of the spell. So knock 3 times in the door, turn 3 times in the circle. For these occultists, they try to do three times. What's the relevance of 11? 11 is the number of the disciples after Judas betrayed Christ and then committed suicide. So that's the number of discord, of separation. So this 11-11-11 is triple people the power of the discord, trying to throw us into disarray in order to own the future, to own the earth. And the ending of the First World War and the beginning with that 11-11-11 is very relevant, because it's not about when the war began or ended. These people say they have 3 wars planned. And I would contend to you the thing about World War III that's relevant here isn't when World War III begins. Like World War I, it was really a soft start. There was all sorts of conflicts. It was just that the final straw that caused countries to come into this was the killing of Ferdinand. And but the reality is the 11-11-11, what they had in mind if Hillary had won, was this Third World War. And because of the weapons that we have today, the Third World War, it's not about when it starts. Even in the scriptures, it talks about at the appointed hour of the appointed day and the appointed season, when the angel, looses its vial to bring war upon the earth. These people aren't fighting, for example, the King James Version of the Bible. They're fulfilling it. That's their plan. They're not trying to fight the Bible. They're trying to make it come to pass exactly the way they want, but own the outcome. With nuclear weapons, when we have that exchange, if that occurs, they would like to have it occur with some type of an 11 alignment, and they're foretelling that with their 11-11-11. So part of this effort to push back on these monsters, for example, the Q team with 17, this Osiris number, with their magic, why, for example, do we have Area 51? What's Area 51? It's the maximum of the magic. Maximum of the magic, because 17 times 3 is what? 51. And so reversing the magic, unwinding the magic. We're not trying to come at this like a white witch battling a black witch. We're not doing that at all. And that's not what this administration's about. This is unwinding their magic, countering it, and bringing it back into our control and owning these numbers back. 5 is the number of grace and redemption. But in the occult world, for Christians, within a godly context, but in the occult world, 5 is the number of death to enemies and defense. That's why the Pentagon has 5 sides. So are we owning these numbers back, taking away their ground, showing up in Dallas on the 17th? Is there some kind of risk factor here? Yeah, I think there is. I think the president is sending a very clear message to these monsters, because, Linda, we're on the cusp at this moment of reversing these trends that have been in play for a very long time. Some people, because I mentioned Egypt and leaving slavery and like that, there's been people I've seen out on the web, and people have sent me stuff. Trump is like Moses. Trump is no Moses. Trump is not playing a Moses part here. I mean, there may be some, ways that it fits that, but Trump is not Moses. If you wanted to use that as an allegory, and imagery like this in allegories, they kind of break down fairly quickly, but it's still interesting to use that. But if I was going to use that kind of a picture to help people kind of put this in context, the real Moses was Reagan. Reagan came in. Remember, Carter had all these Council of Foreign Relations people on his cabinet. The whole cabinet was Council of Foreign Relations. Council of Foreign Relations, which was a Rockefeller set-up operation, had really gotten all the key places in government, and their members were there. It was this deep state society club, mutual self-promotion. And our government was really captured. Post-Kennedy, whatever hadn't already been captured after World War II, even back to World War I and before that, this fight that was going on to turn our government into a captured operation, it really was, nearly complete at the point of Carter. Reagan came in and, New Day in America. For those of us who were alive during the Carter years, it was very dark. It was almost like for a conservative, it really was like the Obama era. It was just one crisis after another. We had the Iran hostage crisis. We had, fuel wars and worry about whether you had gas in your tank. And they went from the big engines in the cars to American cars that didn't, couldn't get out of their own way. It was a very dark period in America. And Reagan was kind of a breath of fresh air and arguably a Moses leading us out of this slavery that these people had planned for us, fighting against the higher taxes and the monetary controls that were really enslaving us as a country. But like Moses, the people were in a mental state where they just couldn't quite get their mind out of Egypt. If I was using that allegory, I'd say we just spent 40 years wandering around the desert, or 39. Reagan came in January 20th of 1980. And so we're in the 39th year. If you looked at a biblical example, the 39th year, that's the year that Miriam died, and Moses was taken by God and hidden when he passed away. All of the people older than 19 died in the desert, except for Joshua and Caleb, who were the good spies that came back and said, we can take the land. Everybody else died out there in the desert, including Moses. Trump is no Moses. In this kind of an allegory, Trump would be a Joshua. Why? Because what we're on the cusp of right now, Linda, is us going in and taking down these strongholds of evil that are there in Canaan land, that are an abomination to God, that are an abomination to the whole world. These evil empires, these evil structures, and the rituals that they're involved in, that are focused on children and death and enslaving the planet. The threat from Canaan land wasn't just that it was confined there, but it was spreading out. It was building out. There were giants in the land. And so our war right now, our efforts right now, are at this cusp moment to go back and, just as Kennedy was trying to confront these globalists and say, even though Kennedy wasn't a perfect man, he recognized at some point that it had gone too far. It was going too far. That he did not want to preside over World War III, and had some glimmer of understanding that he couldn't be that guy. But these people are relentless. The devil's behind him himself. They've made their pacts with the devil. One thing I should mention here as an aside, your listeners probably don't even realize there's 1 in 100,000 people in this audience that would even know that before 9/11, there was 3/11. Everything we're involved in right now on a global scale that we're fighting really revolves around the events of 3/11. And most of your people don't even know what I'm talking about. I'll tell you. 3/11 is the event that brought China into this global operation for the deep state. If you go back to what happened in 1917, these people like chaos and disruption. That's the thing I was talking about the other day, Linda, is that they want us to be in a state of fear and chaos. Mm-hmm. That's when they can do things. That's when they can pull it off, is in that cloud of chaos. They can accomplish a lot because chaos in order to do their building. Out of chaos, order. 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. Who was behind that? Where did the money come from for the Bolshevik Revolution that created the Soviet Union? Well, that was New York money. That was London money. That was Rothschilds, Rockefellers, all these families working together. And they're the ones that funded Lenin, put the gold on the train, sent them across Europe to lead this Bolshevik revolution and take down the monarchy in Russia, a monarchy that had been favorable to the United States, and that we got along, and create this Cold War. The Russian people actually are natural allies of the U.S. and of the American people, and but we've been put at each other's throats. And so who funded it? What was behind it? I would contend that's part of the Pike conspiracy. The people behind that just as we've had this hidden society here in America, behind the scenes, this deep state, they're not confined here. They're in these other countries in the world. Red Square. What are you really looking at there? What are you looking at in the Vatican with this obelisk out there? What obelisk, what's the symbology mean there from a Christian perspective? Why are these obelisks all over the place? Saddam had it there in Iraq. Their symbology is on all your money. They have talismans of their presence, their imprint, their tattoos on everything around you, and the corporations they run. If you look at the symbology in these corporations, one of the banks, I can't think of the name of it now, when you look at their logo, it's 11, 11, 11, three different ways. You look at all of the golden arches, you turn it on its side, it's 13, there's 13 families. There's people who have done extensive work, and I mean, you just look at all these logos, it's not tens, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these largest corporations, and they always have these allusions back to their families. And they put themselves in the key places. It's not just the leader that you see, it's the crowd behind them. Who rules? Is it the Pharaoh or the high priest behind him? This hidden society. David in the Bible talks about that he was being conspired against by these hidden councils in his own house that met in secret and plotted against him. Out in the desert, Moses, those people, why Moses? Why did it have to be Moses? Why couldn't a God called somebody that was in slavery in Egypt all that time? Why did it have to be Moses? Moses is all the way over in North Africa. He's in exile. Why did it have to be Moses drug all the way back to Egypt to bring the people out of slavery? You're telling me that there's arguably 400,000 to 1 million people there, children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the great-grandkids, who've become a whole nation of people. In that whole 400 to 1,000 to 1 million people, there's not one guy that could be the one God would call to, rise up in the midst of the slavery and lead the people out of Egypt to the promised land. It had to be Moses. Why is that? Because they were so immersed in that mindset, there was none of them that could think clearly anymore. They were so locked in the illusions. Moses was raised in Pharaoh's house to be a pharaoh. He understood their tricks. He understood how they thought. And then when he went into, because he realized that God wanted him to do something, but his way of doing it wasn't God's way. When he saw one of the taskmasters beating one of the Hebrew children, he got mad, got angry, and in his anger, he killed the Egyptian taskmaster. Moses had a temper. When Moses came down off the mountain, the people had started worshiping a golden calf because they were going back to their Egypt mentality. He comes off Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, and he's coming down, with this gift from God. And here he sees the people worshiping the golden calf. He gets so upset, he throws down the tablets and breaks the tablets that God had just wrote on with his own finger, writing out the Ten Commandments. Moses had a temper. The reason that Moses didn't go into the Promised Land, he complained to God that, Moses believed he was the one to take the people into the Promised Land. That was his mission. He went to Egypt. He left his comfort, tending sheep with his wife, his kids, enjoying life, the father-in-law that he loved and enjoyed, and because God tells him he has to go, free his people. So he comes all the way back to Egypt, goes through all the drama of the 10 plagues, and finally the people, they still don't want to leave. The Egyptians gave them all their gold and jewelry, all their riches and wealth, and said, get out of here. They're paying them to leave. Please leave. They didn't just leave like they were being extracted. They were forced to leave because the Egyptians told them to get the heck out of here, and gave them their riches to bribe them to leave. They didn't even want to leave slavery. They had to be bribed to leave their slavery. God's pulling them out. Moses is trying to lead them, and they still didn't want to leave. They had Egypt in their mind, in their soul. They were infused with it. We can't take down the way the government's working because I've got my 401k. It's my turn. I get paid off. I'm way invested here. We can't mess up the dollar now. The Ponzi scheme, it's my turn. I've reached that level in the Ponzi scheme that now I get my payoff. It was a Ponzi scheme all along. These people have been playing you. And that now it's your turn to get paid off. Okay, so we got to keep the corruption because it's your turn. Okay, well, get Egypt out of your mind. No, Trump is like a Joshua, and he's here at this moment in time, and the difference is for Trump, Moses was fighting a people that wouldn't leave Egypt in their mind, their way of operating, their way of thinking. And it frustrated Moses. Moses was complaining to God how hard-hearted the people were, how difficult they were to work with, how they were always fighting with them over stuff. They didn't want to go into the Promised Land, so they were forced to wander in circles out in the desert for 40 years. And only those 19 and younger got to go into the Promised Land. They had a different mentality. This moment right now, this people that President Trump is dealing with aren't the people that President Reagan had to deal with. They understand this Q movement, with this day being so important with Q back and the communications coming back up again, is critical because we have a whole country full of people who are awakening. Many are already wide awake. Many are just stirring out of that sleep, but look at the crowds that show up for President Trump at these rallies around the country. What president has gone out and just talked with the people as President Trump has been doing all through this presidency, and especially this last year, and giving a people a chance to hear him say directly what he wants to say, unfiltered by the media, twisted and turned by the media. And he doesn't talk for 10 or 15 minutes. He's not speaking off a teleprompter. He talks for an hour and a half. The stamina, the clarity of mind and focus that he has when he talks, it's from the heart. You saw that thing the other day where he did the speech, and the pastor and other men were there, put their hands on his shoulders and prayed for him, for his protection and for wisdom as he does the things he does here for the country. And Secret Service didn't rush the stage to keep the people away from him to pray for him and to lay hands on him. He's under some divine protection. People worry about that coming into Dallas. They can plot and scheme all they want. He's under divine protection. And that just frustrates them all the more. Doesn't matter how great their plans are, how great their evil conspiracies are, and all the players involved. God can take them out in the moment. They can have a heart attack in the middle of the night. They'll take each other out. They'll self-eliminate. coming up on these critical days and moments as we prepare to cross the Jordan, go into the Promised Land, and pull down these temples, these monuments to Satan and to Lucifer and to evil and to Moloch. When we consider what this moment's all about, what happened previously with Kennedy there in Dallas, with his assassination, with the diffusing of his efforts to get control back of our currency and to stop this madness marching us towards some type of a world conflict and a Cold War that would result in some kind of a hair-trigger confrontation, which, one of the things I should mention, there's this beautiful book of writings, Lost Books of Eden. The interesting thing about those writings is it's the understanding that was there in the Egyptian world prior to Moses of what Adam and Eve passed down through their children, of what occurred in the days after they left the garden, or kicked out of the garden. It's kind of a day-by-day account. And it's interesting because these writings were recorded in Egypt and probably at Joseph's direction. Joseph being one of the 12 children of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. And so here you have these writings that were the handed-down verbal history of what happened after the garden from Adam and Eve to their kids down through the generations. And then it was recorded, written down, and saved that way. And in those writings, the description of this encounter with the snake, this entity that had deceived Eve and then Adam and caused them to be kicked out of the garden, and the promises from God about their redemption through Eve's seed. The interesting thing is how they describe this snake, that its eyes burned like fire in hatred towards Adam and Eve. They were fearful. They were afraid of this, and it kept coming after them and coming after them over and over. Every day it had a new plan to take them out. And so these writings are really interesting. I mean, I'd encourage any of your readers to go out and pick up a copy of the Lost Books of Eden and read it for themselves. It's I don't put it in the scripture category, but it's the way that people perceived this out of Egypt, this understanding of what they were up against as far as this entity that sought their destruction, the destruction of all the children of Adam. And you bring that forward to right now, that intensity of hatred, that intensity of evil, that's what I think is lost on people today a lot of times here in the country. They don't recognize just how much the power behind these people that seek the destruction of the whole world with a third world war to own the world away from us, how that's inspired by Lucifer, Satan himself. The United Nations, for all that it's supposed to be a peacekeeping organization, where did the money come from? The Lucis Trust. The Lucis Trust. The Lucifer Trust. World War I, the U.S. getting into the war. What was the precipitating event? The sinking of the Lusitania.
Oh, wow.
Their imagery is all over the place. They keep doing it over and over. You want to recognize where they're at. They're doing it on the numbers. They're doing it on the symbology. They're doing it in their name, right in your face. And part of their point is that if they show you by the numbers, by the symbology, by the illusions, who they are and what they're doing, even though it's a little bit cloudy, the way they think, if you let it go, if you don't challenge it, then you're in agreement with it. To not say something, there's sins of commission and sins of omission. And a sin of omission is to see evil, to recognize injustice, and stand idly by. Then you're a participant because you did not choose to stand against it. When they put their symbology in front of you and make it clear that they're there with their hidden fingerprints, if you don't challenge it, if you don't recognize it, then the bad karma is on you. It's not their fault. They told you what they were about. They told you what they were going to do. If you didn't stop it, well, then, you knew. You didn't do anything about it. So what's your problem? I mentioned the 311. 311 before 9/11. It was a prelude to 9/11, trying to lead us into this world conflict for World War III. When World War III happens, if they succeed in it, it's not when the war starts, it's when the war ends. Because it'll be a nuclear exchange. It'll all happen in 1 hour of one day. And I would contend that it's related to an 11-11-11. Why? Because what they believe is based on the other physics, that if they detonate those nuclear bombs in the right sequence, in the right way, and remember, you're dealing with archangel-level intelligence. The devil's a pretty smart guy. He's not, there's an intelligence from physics side and everything else that's way beyond what we normally think. That's why we need divine assistance and protection to understand and fight this. We battle not against principalities, or battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of darkness in high places. They believe that when that exchange happens with the nuclear stuff, that it'll block out the sun. It'll turn the sun black as sackcloth. Maybe even affect the sun physically because of the way the physics works. And that they restart the sun, new day. That they have that power. Even the locations that would be struck have numerical meaning, where the bases are located that would be hit, centers, etc. So there's a tie-in to this 11-11-11. They're foretelling this date that they want things to happen on, just like 9/11 had to happen on a very specific date. 3/11, the date that virtually nobody in your audience has even ever thought of, was a key date because as a result of what happened on that day, even though it didn't go down the way they wanted it to, the way they planned, they used that event subsequently to twist China around, to convince China that it was time to enter the world stage. And then their players went in with their money, their experts, and assisted China, just like they went into the Soviet Union after the Bolshevik Revolution and controlled that. See, they run worlds, they run political powers both in the West and the East, playing them both off against each other. We've been involved over our lifetime in seeing our nation and other nations played off against each other to bring us into these conflicts, and out of these conflicts, this chaos. They gain more power. They gain this internal military power. They're able to have a need for spies. They create their spy agencies, and then they put their players in charge. Kennedy complained about the CIA, said he wanted to break it into 1,000 pieces and scatter the pieces at four winds. Who's Trump fighting right now? People that had this in these deep state intelligence operations that were conspiring and working against him, not just here in the U.S., but on foreign soil, with MI5 and 6, with Downer, with Australia involved. Those are the people that put together the dossier and conspired about how to make it look like Trump was working with the Russians. Comey's going to be arrested shortly. other players are going to be arrested shortly, and it's going to be related to the fact that they were co-conspiring with intelligence agency personnel from CIA and these other agencies in order to take down his presidency, to keep him from, first of all, becoming president, but then, since then, to stop him from being able to act as president, to lead up to an impeachment situation. Why? Because he's a threat to their globalist plans, to their globalist operations. And their players aren't just here in the U.S., they're in other countries. In Russia, they have a presence from these same families that goes all the way back to the origins, the money that created the Soviet Union, and now through the oligarchs and the intelligence agencies, the Russia as we know it today. But back in the mid-'60s, when we were at the height of the Cold War, after World War II, when Europe had been divided up, and Stalin was there, who was Stalin being supported by and prodded by behind the scenes? Deep state, just like we had it here in the West. They were controlling both sides. How do you win a revolution? You own both sides. How do you control the outcome? Because you have people in both sides of the revolution. And so the deep state wasn't just working here in the U.S. against our interests domestically to bring us into a global new world order with their secret handshake society, skull and crossbones, and dozens of other similar organizations that coordinate together. These Rockefeller entities, Council of Foreign Relations. Where was Biden when he made his little statement about how he told those Ukrainians, you don't have this solved, I'm leaving in 6 hours, you don't get this solved, you're not getting your $1 billion. Well, where was that? He was bragging amongst his friends at this CFR meeting, how powerful he is, and he can pull off whatever he's got to pull off, and don't you worry, I got your back, and I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do here for our little club. That was the context. It's been going on for a long time. And those players are in all the sides of the confrontations.
Yeah, he says something. He says something like, I got somebody good in there, or something like that. Mm-hmm. I guess meaning somebody who's going to go along with everything they want him to go along with.
Well, it's a club. Secret handshake club. And so when you look at this, with our, we have this ability right now. And when I say the numbers, 3/11, before there was a 9/11, they were manipulating not just our side, but the other side from inside also. In Russia, and China, of course, one of the things that's interesting is that they look at this like a three-phase motor. They look at planet Earth like a three-phase motor, 2 on, 1 off. And so what they do is they have 2 countries fighting against each other and one in the opposition. Then one of those countries goes silent and the other one kicks on, and now you have the other 2 fight back and forth. And so it makes the world go round. And, one of the reasons why, for example, we had to get out of Syria, what's been happening classically is first there'd be a problem in the Mideast. So everybody's attention's there. Then there'd be a problem over with North Korea. So everybody's attention's back there. And it's China and North Korea. And then as soon as your attention's over there, then it's something domestic here in the United States. And then it's back to something with Ukraine and Russia. And then it's back over to China. It's ping pong, back and forth, and it kept us off kilter all the time. And then you have people in harm's way. And so any given moment, if something's happening domestically and it doesn't suit their purposes, bang, all of a sudden some of our guys are being killed and they're under siege in Syria, and the Kurds in this bizarre situation. these intelligence agencies are creating crises and able to push the news back and forth and a new fear thing and danger thing someplace else in the world and then back to the U.S. And so you could never get your balance. You were always off kilter. And at this cusp moment today, this day, this such an important day, October 17th, 2019, a hinge moment in the history of our country. The president cannot have them be able to distract us back and forth across the world easily like they've been doing. So for all that there's issues in North Korea, you know, who was feeding information in North Korea to let their systems work? There was deep state CIA people, family people. What is Eric Schmidt putting this computer stuff helping in North Korea? What's that all about? Of course, it's been going on a long time. China, the technology transfer, the industrialization of China, taking all of our factories, all of our expertise, all of our intricate knowledge that we paid for as taxpayers, third stage missile technology, ability to go to space, and transfer it, give it to China. You know, when China opened up, who was the first? It wasn't really an ambassadorship. It was a liaison, essentially, because we didn't have an ambassador relationship with China. Who was the first one to go there? George Bush Sr., the ultimate deep state player, present there in Dallas when Kennedy was killed. You know, I don't know where I was. Everybody in the world knows where they were at the moment Kennedy was killed. The one guy that doesn't know where he was when Kennedy was killed? George Bush Sr. You know, bullshit. Come on, grow up. This deep state operation, people with their secret handshakes, taking on people in positions of power that won't go along with what they're told. They'll take them down in a moment. You think you can survive this? You think you're big enough? We're everywhere. And that's been the theme going on for hundreds of years. The bravery, the focus of not just President Trump and his family, but the men behind the scenes that you haven't heard their names or don't know who they are, don't understand the involvement from the military intelligence side, going back MacArthur and beyond, to create a mechanism, to work a plan, even when there's been problems run into in a Valkyrie-type operation, and to stay with it, to take these monsters down and to re-own our country. Incredible. But in Russia, in this Cold War that was going on, in the era just past the death of Kennedy, they wanted to create a context for the world to go to, you know, create the other next superpower. It wasn't just that the U.S. and Russia needed to be against each other. It's a three-stage motor to make the world go round for their plans to control the world in this ping-pong, back and forth, on and off, keep us in a perpetual state of war. So they needed China. These deep state players that created Russia also wanted to create China, the three parts to lead up to the Third World War. And they needed China not just to be an agrarian world. You know, after World War II, China, we went in and fought China. One of my friends flew the aluminum trail, where there was so many aircraft went down, keeping the Chinese viable. The Flying Tigers history, that it was called the aluminum trail because there's just a trail of aircraft, guys trying to keep China viable in this Second World War. And then after the Second World War, China goes communist. Who was behind that? These same deep state players. Russia was our friends, our allies, and they go through this Bolshevik revolution. They come out the other side of it, and they're now our enemy. And Stalin's running it. They're killing off millions across the country. Mao's killing off millions and millions across his country. so that they could control those populations and use them in this global conflict, this creation of a global state for their benefit, not ours, this Luciferian project. So when you look at China, China was still not fully coming in. It's behind the Great Wall. They weren't interacting with the rest of the world. Their leaders weren't focused on the outside. They were focused internally in the mid-60s. And part of the problem was these Chinese are migrating and infiltrating into Mongolia, into these interregions of Russia, and starting to take over those regions. Russia and the deep state people running Russia, people higher than Khrushchev, those people needed to put China kind of in its place a little bit, turn the U.S.'s attention not to Russia but to China, to spread our forces again and create this basis for a new conflict. So there was an interesting thing that happened, Linda. I apologize if it's a little long here, but it's kind of history information. You know, some of your people won't want it. Others will enjoy it, I hope. China, and so for those that don't, I mean, I apologize, it's just what it is. China and Russia were working, they're both communists, you know, in the late 50s, early 60s. At the end of the day, really, it's the secret handshake crowd that's working them together for the money, etc. So after World War II, Russia's kind of helping China to, keep, the U.S. at bay or whatever. And so China's got to improve technologically. They don't have the ability to, they've got nuclear capability, but they don't have the ability to fire anything. So Russia, and they don't have, submarine technology really. It's a pretty complex thing. So what Russia does is it sells China, these deep state players engineer it, sells them a couple of Golf 1 submarines, Golf, G-O-L-I, just like golf ball. They sell them a couple of these Golf 1 submarines that are, Russia's got them down pretty good, diesel submarine. And they're capable of carrying a nuclear missile. These early submarines, they only have, with these missiles, it's not like the submarines today. They can't fire from underwater. And we don't have GPS. We don't have the ability to precisely locate that submarine somewhere on the surface of the Earth from satellites. The missiles themselves, you don't have the communication to fly the missile to where it's going. You basically dial in a trajectory, like shooting an arrow from the bow. You get it pointed as close to where you want it to go and let her fly and hope you got it right. And in those early days, a missile might miss the target by, miles. But you get it sort of close. And that's why you needed big nuclear bombs on the top of the missiles, because they might miss the target by a long ways. So you had to wipe out everything, hopefully, unless you hit the hardened bunker precisely, you weren't going to take it out. So China gets 2 of these Golf 1 submarines, and they're getting their sea legs, they're getting their understanding because of this relationship with Russia. But then in the early 60s, mid 60s, the relationship between Russia and China began to sour. Well, of course, from a deep state side, because they want 2 separate powers to be working against the U.S. for this ping pong operation, back and forth, and this globalist operation, this 3-phase motor idea. And there's papers on that are insider stuff, and some of your people want to go look at that. That's actually not a new thought or concept. That's deep insider stuff. So China has these 2 Golf 1 submarines. The thing about the missiles that they're capable of firing is they only have a range of about 400 miles. So the submarine has to be relatively close. Now, in the mid-'60s, Russia had improved their submarines and their missile technology, and their missiles could then go out there about 800 miles, and those were the Gulf IIs. And shortly after, it got a bit more range. And this is important little details, because if you're going to do a false flag, and you want easy tells that are easy to tell on the evening news or to the world in the newspaper, it's got to be this way because this is the way it is. It seems like you've made this huge discovery, but when they're doing false flags, you see how there's so much detail and planning. It's like when 9/11 happened, and then suddenly this, Homeland Security Protection Bill miraculously appears. Thousands of pages. It didn't just magically appear. That was written for years prior to that date, because 9/11 was cued to that date. The announcement the day before, we're looking for missing, billions of dollars here at the, trillions of dollars here at the Pentagon, and bang, the next day, Pentagon gets blasted right in the spot where the records are. We never get, whatever. The planning is thorough and intense. And so this submarine that China has, these two submarines, their range is under 400 miles to hit someplace. Everybody knows the Chinese bought two Russian subs, and Russia and China are on the outs now. And China, we've had a tough year in '68, Tet Offensive in Vietnam. There's real pressures going on here. The Chinese are there in Asia. The Russians are there in Asia. We're having all of these conflicts. And there's a setup here. How do you get China to industrialize? How do they get in a sense of a threat of war, like we're done, like Russia's doing? Why in the Cold War was our technology ramping forward so quickly, and the space and everything else in our citizenry being amped up to be on alert moment to moment to moment to moment? Well, how do you do that with an agrarian culture that, this grown rice trying to stay alive? You gotta, get the bit in the horse's mouth. You gotta, get the stick and prod them. And, gotta have them under threat. And, there's gotta be some kind of a, monster coming after them. Well, U.S., from a Russia standpoint too, you want the U.S. to do your dirty work. Russia doesn't want to take on China. They want to bait us into doing something against China because they're doing stuff in Vietnam and supplying arms through Cambodia and stuff like that, Indonesia, Indochina situation. So how do you get us to do some of the bad things for supposedly the Russians? You fool us into doing it. So a submarine, the operational number was K-129. It just come back in the just after the first of the year in Russia from a patrol. These patrols, they go up for a few months and they come back and they, change crews, they refit the ship and go back out. In the Cold War, we had our subs, they had theirs, we're tracking them, it's cat and mouse. We had patrol areas we go out to and hang out and be ready to fire missiles and take out locations and blah, blah, blah. Lots of great books on that. K-129 comes back, and instead of getting the full time off that they would normally get, suddenly the crew is called back for an emergency deployment. Other people are put on the boat. Up through command, not everybody's fully aware. The command staff on the boat are asking questions. Why are we doing this? This isn't fair to our crews and our people. What's the emergency? But they're told to stand down, do what they're told. Extra crew is put aboard. a submarine is very confined space, and you have no extra room, especially in those early days. They're stinky, uncomfortable, really foul. And so when you add extra people on a boat, if you got a boat that's, set up for 70 people and you have an extra 10 or 15 people, oh my gosh, it's brutal. And so they're sent out on a secret emergency deployment. This is well documented. There's no, people want to question, well, what you're talking about. It's well documented in the Russian side also, not just here from the U.S. side. And they send this sub out, goes to the patrol area, and disappears. It had a date when it was supposed to call in and just touch bases, everything's good to go, we're in our assigned area, and go quiet again. And that date was missed. That was on 3/12/1968. Because on 3/11/1968, that sub, somewhere before that period of time, had been commandeered by the extra people on board that sub and taken past its normal patrol area and down to within 400 miles of Pearl Harbor, and then surfaced. Because in those days, in order to fire a missile, what they would do, because you just had to point and shoot like an arrow, what they had to do is they had to surface. And then they would triangulate their location from radio signals. So in China, they had, for their own forces, radio signals were broadcast from precise locations. And if you knew where a couple of those locations were at, you could triangulate your location and tell exactly where on the surface of the Earth you were located to within a very tiny fraction. Then you could dial in the coordinates where you wanted to send that missile, and it would arrive pretty close to that exact spot. You're picking a big area like, say, Pearl Harbor. You could get it close enough that you do real damage. And so this sub, this Russian sub, surfaces, gets its triangulation correct, and then, because it's on the surface and the way the subs are, you have to, the Gulf War submarine, unlike our subs that were down below the surface in modern times, they would actually put an observer outside the sub, in a nice warm jacket, and he'd have to be up in their conning tower, and he would communicate down inside the sub that there was no flotsam, no obstructions blocking the missile tube, because the missile tube's blocked in any way. The missile could blow up in the chamber, not clear the ship properly, and destroy the ship. And so you had a person out there, as you're getting down to the final seconds to the launch, verify everything's clear. He ducks behind the conning tower, and off goes the missile. He's dressed differently than everybody else in the boat. He's dressed for outside. Warm, shielding leather jacket that can also, deflect any flames from the rocket as it leaves. And then the location, about 385 miles north of Honolulu, that's pretty critical too, because being as far away as possible is a big deal, so that you don't have to get down inside of an area where you can be detected more readily, where maybe more of our ships are monitoring or looking, our SOSUS listening arrays are paying attention. The Russians could shoot from 800 miles out. The Gulf II submarines had this bigger capability. The Chinese submarines could only fire from 400 out, less than 400. So the instant thing would be, in going back and looking at the trajectory of this missile coming in, well, it was fired from inside a certain zone. It's where the Chinese subs had been seen before. We didn't know where they were that particular day. we could instantly report minutes later it had to be a Chinese sub. It had to be Bin Laden. It had to be Bin Laden. Well, how do you know it was Bin Laden seconds after the building comes down? It had to be. Because it was dialed in advance. They had a plan. They were going to tell you what it was. They weren't going to wait for you to figure it out. They were going to program you what it was. Oh, China bad. Go get China. It was a Chinese sub that fired on Honolulu. And so this sub gets on the surface. It's ready to go. It's at night. Ready to fire. Something happened. The missile blew up in the chamber. Didn't go right. You know, these are complex pieces of machinery. Some people think it was designed always to blow up in the chamber, that was always the deep state's plan. I don't believe so for a bunch of reasons. But whatever happened, that sub blew apart, missile blew up in the chamber, and sank the sub in 17,000 feet of water. We became aware of it. The Russians didn't hear from their sub. There's all sorts of chatter going on. The event didn't happen for the deep state players that got all keyed up, ready to, you know, twist world events and go to war with China and change the world again, creating the next best enemy that money can buy. It didn't happen that way. The largest project of its type, akin to going to Mars, not just the moon, occurred in the time period thereafter. In fact, when Johnson became aware of what precisely had happened, Johnson, in the months afterwards, decided not to run for the presidency a second time, for the 68 election, and focus on local affairs. By accounts of people around him, he became convinced that he had been selected to preside over the destruction of the world in the nuclear war. And it drove him crazy, drove him mad. He didn't want to be that guy any more than Kennedy had. He, somewhere in there, recognized just how horrible it was. And in his last days on this planet, he grew his hair out long like a hippie and was smoking marijuana. That was LBJ. He'd gone off his rocker.
Who, Lyndon B. Johnson?
Johnson, yes.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And that's from his personal security people discussing this, and it really did drive him off his rocker. And so Nixon becomes president. Nixon's aware of this. He's an insider. Nixon's a Rockefeller boy. When Nixon didn't get the presidency with Kennedy, and it was because Kennedy's dad had helped to cook the books there in Chicago on the voters and delivered some precincts. You know, a lot of people told Nixon he needed to contest the election, and he said, you know, for the good of the country, that would just not be a good thing, and he backed down. To Nixon's credit, Nixon is in office. You know, when he was in the interim between the election that Kennedy got and he didn't, where does he go work? He works in New York, and the building where he's working at, it has one address, and you walk down the hall just 100 feet, and all of a sudden you're in a different address. Same building, same hallway and all that. What's on the other side of the building? Different address. Oh, and by the way, the side he's on doing his legal work, he's just down the hall from David Rockefeller. He was always a Rockefeller guy. Brought him up through the ranks. What was Nixon's role in the post-World War II thing as a Navy reservist? He was the one that was handling the paperclip scientists and helping to integrate them and plant them at the various places in the U.S., in the universities and in the government projects. So Nixon knew very well this Nazi component coming into the country, was very, very aware of it. And he was an ambassador. He was vice president under Eisenhower. Knew all the deep state secrets. And here he gets up to the presidency, and then people talk about the time, Tricky Dick, and he's looking over his shoulder, and he's concerned about stuff. The reason he's looking over his shoulder is he knows how the thing runs. He knows who's behind it. He actually wanted to set up his own intelligence agency just to serve the president, called the Houston Project. And who did he use for the Houston Project? He had, one of the key guys is a gay guy, getting some of the best intelligence. Why? Because Washington was totally corrupt, and the honeypots and the sex operations and the homosexuality was rampant, and so he needed people that could make those inroads, and he used some gay people in there. There's a whole history in there. Dark Journalist has done some fantastic interviews and exploration of that, and my hat is off to him. A phenomenal series that he's done with his X Project stuff. Worth every minute of your listeners' time to go look at some of his work, the Dark Journalist. And so Nixon is approached shortly after he takes office, and Mr. President, there's a sub, it's a Russian sub, and it's out north of Hawaii, and it was going to fire on Pearl Harbor. It was there to simulate a Chinese sub and to con us into a false flag against China. And we've told the Chinese about it and told them they need to open up and have better relations with us, because if we have better relations, it wouldn't be as easy to pull off a false flag and to get us in a war with each other. And the Chinese aren't cooperating. And after we located the sub, USS Halibut had gone out there and found the sub, a really interesting submarine that worked underwater and could deploy a fish camera system to go down and search for the sub on the seafloor until they found it. The remains, and they took like 35,000 photographs of the impact site where it landed on the bottom of the ocean. But the Chinese that they had approached covertly didn't believe that it was real, didn't believe that it had actually happened, thought that, because it wasn't on the evening news. Walter Cronkite hadn't talked about the Russian sub that blew up and is sitting on the ocean floor. And we didn't want to let the Russians know that we knew where their sub was, their little deep state operation. Most of the Russian command had no clue where the sub was. They're looking for the sub up where it was supposed to be patrolling, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Wasn't supposed to be anywhere near where it was sitting on the seafloor. And so they weren't even looking there. They had no concept, because it had been commandeered, deep state operation, run to a different location to simulate a Chinese sub. And Chinese just didn't believe it, even though we had the photographs showing what was there. So the proposal was, we got to go pick this thing up. We got to bring it to the surface. And we can get all sorts of information, logbooks, how their systems work, how their missiles are specifically set to blow, etc., that might give us understanding how to throw a monkey wrench in. So this incredible project, akin to going to Mars, is done to create a ship big enough to go down and pick a whole submarine up off the seafloor, hundreds of tons, and raise it to the surface, recover it intact. It's kind of broken, in one piece, but it's broken back. And there's a claw that's created to pick this thing up, kind of like a kid's, the thing you see at the stores where the kids can try to catch a prize with claws, get out and pick it up. The Clementine Project for this claw, and the Jennifer Project for the overall device. I'm sorry, I had a call there. I had to shut off. The American patriots, the best of the best, deep secrecy, do this unbelievable engineering project. I mean, the best of what America is, to create something that most everybody involved coming into it was like, well, you can't do that. That's impossible, or pretty close to impossible, or it would take more money than anybody's ever going to have to do. But, you know, as people get into it, well, actually, yeah, it is possible. It's just going to be really hard. And all of a sudden, no, we can do this. And they use Howard Hughes as the cover, you know, as though he's doing a mining project and could afford to do this, and that's the cover. And it actually held pretty good. It's amazing all the work that was done to pull this off. To go out and pick up the sub, there's even a cover story that the sub broke in half, and I know I can hear guys cringing when I say that it didn't break in half. No. It absolutely broke in half. Had that conversation. We recovered the whole sub. And the proof of that is, by the way, and I'm talking to a very small crowd here that has been tuned in a certain way, the proof that we got the whole sub is the bell. The ship's bell was in the conning tower, and when they pulled that thing up, they got it with the bell. The bell was not sitting on the seafloor. The reason the Russians never found the rest of the wreck is the rest of the wreck isn't there. We got it all. And even though they knew where we were recovering at when they came out, they didn't realize what we were doing. But they had their ships there. They knew those coordinates. And they couldn't find the ship. Why? Because we got the whole thing. And we gave the bell back several years ago to the Russians. And that was a hidden message. Yeah, we got the whole sub. Yes. Here's your bell back. And the cover story of the ship broke. We didn't get everything out. We got it all. The part that is unknown even to most of the people listening here that might have some knowledge of the project is that there were Chinese associates who physically observed what happened and went back to China and said, yes, it actually did occur. The sub did do it. It was saying it was done. It did try to fire on Pearl Harbor and was staged at that location in order to simulate, to do this false flag that it was a Chinese Gulf submarine firing on Pearl Harbor, and then to incite America to go to war with China, to expand the Indochina War into China, and causes problems. So the Chinese were then motivated, because we're the good guys, our secret handshake guys are there, the George Bush Seniors, future head of CIA, are there, coaxing and coaching the Chinese to bring our players in, help them set up their industries, help them to organize their military, making the next best enemy money can buy, to then force us to further militarize our country, to build out this military-industrial political complex that is America at this point in time, and serve their globalist ambitions to create the context for a third world war. And the aftermath of that chaos, of that destruction, for them, these globalists, to lead the remaining population into their Luciferian global world order. This destruction of the world out of the chaos order. This half a billion survivors coming out of their deep underground military bases and re-owning the world in a Dr. Strangelove type of way. And that's still the threat today. These people haven't given up. The plan is still the same. The difference is, rather than waiting for the Canaanites to come and take over the rest of the world, to continue to build out, to move their monuments and structures and Canaanite ways, their Moloch worship, their child sacrifice out into the rest of the world, their blood drinking. That we're leaving the Sinai. We're tired of walking around in circles out in the desert. And we're not the generation that left Egypt. That's the beauty, Linda, of what's happening today with the Q team coming back on, communicating again. See, Moses' complaint to God was that the people weren't with him. Moses had this dream of going into Canaan land and occupying it as God had promised it to his people, to Abraham and his descendants. Everywhere he set the sole of your foot's yours. And to displace the evil that was growing there. And Moses' complaint to God was these people wouldn't do it. They kept fighting him all the way. They weren't willing. They were satisfied eating manna, running around in circles out in the desert. Even then, they did complain about the manna, and they ended up getting meat. Oh, you want meat? I'll give you meat. They had it till it was coming out their nose. So then they went back to the manna. They were constantly fighting Moses. We need to worship a golden calf. Why Moses? Moses, they're constantly railing against Moses. Well, who made you in charge of us, Moses? Why shouldn't it be one of us that was actually in slavery in Egypt, that was actually under the taskmaster? You were raised in Pharaoh's house. Because Moses knew how it worked. He knew the players. He was raised as a sibling to the Pharaoh that was fighting him. They're raised in the same house. They're raised as brothers. The point is that right now, today, at this hinge moment, Linda, and what I would say to your listeners, and ask them to consider prayerfully. I believe today is that hinge day where we make the decision, and where the decisions of our leaders have already been made, thank God, that we're going in to tear down these strongholds and to begin the process of capturing back the operation of our country, to take down these strongholds of evil in our country that are being done in our name, with our assets, our resources, our tax money, our industry, and to take the world in a different direction, not just for America, but for people all over the world that are under the same enslavement by these same secret handshake groups working us against each other. We don't have anything against Chinese people, we don't have anything against Russian people, but these players keep engineering ways to put us at each other's throats. And we have to recognize it's not the Chinese people. These people that they've put in power in those locations, just like they've been putting people in power here in our country. The honeypots, the payoff, the blackmail and extortion to control these people, the secret sex clubs. I'll make you a billionaire. Your family will be billionaires forever. These people who are cultivated in the spy agencies, and okay, we'll help you get political office. And we want you to be the one that's got this political office because we need you to do certain things and help control it and manage it. And then your husband will get to, make the money on the side, but you'll just be a good politician here in the Silicon Valley. And that's what we want to put the industry. And when we need a hand here or there, we need something special, you'll do it for us, right? Okay, Diane. So that's been the way the game has been played. And this hinge moment that has been being worked for, these people that complain it's not happening fast enough, my contention would be, Linda, that they're naive as to the magnitude of what it is that we're coming up against. rise of the battle. It's not just a couple crooked politicians. It's not just a couple of sex-crazed maniacs. This is a global operation run by Lucifer, the devil himself. Thank God that Melania would not go stay in the White House until it was cleansed of the evil. Satan has been kicked out of the White House. Pretty amazing statement by a president who's willing to stand and be prayed for, recognizing that he needs strength outside of the human realm, guidance, to make these next actions and to survive them. Because we're not just dealing with flesh and blood people. It's not just a couple guys here and there with their evil machinations against the president or against the country, with their payoffs and their little secret societies and their little payoffs, the banking system, the corporate appointments, etc. It's run by an evil genius mastermind that's lived for eons with intelligence way beyond that of just mere humans, except where you have divine understanding, divine insight, divine protection and preparation. We're at this tough moment, and we're getting ready to go after the real monsters here and abroad. And this is a hinge day, this 17th day, as we get into the rest of these operations for the remainder of this year and all of next, to take down their strongholds and to take back our country and bring back freedom for the whole world. And that's the goal. And it won't be easy, and it's not going to be over in a day or two. And it's not going to. There's going to be some real bends and twists. And by the way, these are people capable of trying to fire a nuclear missile on a city. If you go within the Q project, a THAAD missile fired at Air Force One. Fortunately, we had aircraft with the proper technologies to take that out. We've anticipated explosives built into the walls in the White House to kill the president, even in the White House. Multiple attempts. The train crash that people have forgotten about. These coded messages. Dallas 17th, and Comey's doing his little thing with the Star Wars toys and the green pillow like it's the grassy knoll. There's a real war here. And these players, all the way up to Brennan, to CIA, and Halper over there working out of Britain, and the conspiring that occurred on foreign soil. These are traitors. This is treasonous activity. Taking down the witch. It's a witch hunt. It really is a witch hunt. Who's the witch? Well, it's not President Trump. At the end of the trail, when we actually look, where's the witch? We roll over a rock here. We look behind a tree there. At the end of the day, who's the witch? Who are we really after? We're closing in. I would ask your listeners to prayerfully consider some of the stuff that I said, realize the magnitude of the monster we're after. No complaining. We're not the generation from Reagan and the time afterwards. We're done wandering in the desert. President Trump is no Moses. But he is fulfilling a role. It's a Joshua-like role. And when the people went into the Canaan land, went into the Promised Land, and went after the monsters, they were of one mind, and they were focused, and they were moving in ranks. There was some organization. There was some focus. Joshua didn't take Canaan land. The people took Canaan land. Joshua just was a mouthpiece of God and pointed the right direction and got people working together. That generation that went into the Promised Land wasn't the one that came out of Egypt. We're not the generation that refused, wasn't capable of getting their minds around stopping the deep state activity back at Reagan. Reagan was denied to get where everyone, they make them a promise and then change the rules. The taxes went up. This is that moment. We're about to see wonderful, great, mysterious things. Right. And enjoy. And by the way, again, one last thought, we talk about the popcorn, enjoy the show within the Q operation. The corn is these deep state players, these operatives, these agents that were trained at the farm. And so that training that they get at the farm to be spies, to be undercover, to, take on these roles as operatives, those are these players that we're seeing injected into industry and business, politics, etc. This corn. Well, you got to harvest the corn, you got to husk the corn, you got to degrain the corn, you got to dry it. We're in a harvest period, and then as soon as it's properly dried, we're going to have popcorn. This kernel of truth. This moment. Enjoy the show. Yeah, this is the fall. We're going to have some popcorn here shortly, and these players are going to get their gooses cooked. That's what this moment is about. And so, Jennifer Mack with her very fun memes related to the corn theme, the corn comms, while Q was unavailable. I hope she continues that because some of them are just hysterical. And
there's a link. I just want to say there's a link to Jennifer's memes on my blog right now, and I'm just going to keep that page up. It's all kinds of memes, but there's a link to Jennifer's memes on there.
Well, and then your memes also, Linda. Even with the Q team back, the meme site should be back shortly. It's a lot of new stuff, but I hope you'll maintain yours also as a parallel. And it's fantastic information. The memes, somebody said recently, and I actually have a lot of respect for them, that the deep state isn't memeing each other with this stuff. No, they're not. They're fighting a real war. But the memes are important because it allows us to telegraph complex thoughts, ideas, information in a quick picture.
Well, let me argue that point for a second, because they're watching CNN, they're watching MSNBC, and I actually had Ted Turner talk to us one time about the billboard business and about how he wanted the graphics to be like billboards, instantly read, which really those over-the-shoulder news graphics are memes. And there are all kinds of restrictions and rules about those memes that they are kind of propagandized, So these people who the deep state actually is memeing the public through the news, the false graphics, the false maps, the false, they do all kinds of things and package them up with visuals that reinforce what they're trying to propagandize. And so the memes, I believe, undo a lot of that, that it's like pushing new information in. That's just my opinion.
No, I agree completely. And actually, I would have said, I actually thought about it a second too longer. I'd have said something similar to that because I think that's exactly right. They are memeing. You just don't recognize it as the same way that we're doing it. And so I think this is a very effective tool. It's an important tool. It's the third leg of the Q operation with President Trump's Twitters, the Q communications, and then the visuals. So we got to keep it up. And don't get stressed out when the president's made a decision to pull out of Syria and get our people out of harm's way. It's because what's about to happen here domestically and in other areas internationally is far more important. And we can't have people in harm's way where they can be easily used as a tool to distract these critical operations. And besides that, that was these other guys' thing. That was part of these continued operations to create chaos for us as a country, bind us do with who we are or where we're at right now. Just crazy. As the president said earlier today, 7,000 miles away, really. We're supposed to sort that out. Go sort it out yourself over there. So, doesn't make sense for us. You know, President Washington said, beware foreign entanglements. So we're heeding that advice. The president's doing a great job. So I've gone on longer than many of the people are going to be able to handle. I apologize for that.
That's okay. It was fascinating information. And also, I think that, everybody needs a pep talk at this point.
Well, they're going to get a pep talk tonight with what the president says. I'm anxious for it myself. And even though it's Dallas, the protection of Almighty God is on our president. I believe that 1,000%.
So do I.
A couple of days ago, this prayer that was prayed for him, that was a protection prayer. Anybody that doesn't understand this is a spiritual battle wasn't paying attention during the last administration. They were doing, spiritual things, turning the lights to red, having Katy Perry there. Katy Perry does her interviews talking about how human meat's the best meat. It has nutrients that you can't get anywhere else. What kind of insanity is that? Seriously. And then you have this person as an entertainer at the White House, and we're supposed to just accept that. You ever seen Obama with his little costume with, what looks like a jockstrap over his head with pearls on it?
Oh, yeah.
It's just insane. These people are into their rituals and everything else. They're doing it in plain sight, but most people, the news doesn't cover it, so it didn't happen. Well, it is happening, and that's what we're coming up against. This global occultist Luciferian order that's been working and playing diligently, relentlessly, in plain sight.
Even worse than that, somehow they've tricked us into helping them, throughout all this with our holidays and all of that stuff.
Well, yes, and that's why these dates are so critical, and that's why even Halloween, the notice to the Marines that they had to be available to be deployed starting on the 18th, tomorrow. It wasn't an actual deployment order as I read it. It was just a directive that they had to be ready to be deployed on very short notice. So that was October 5th, I believe that was. That was 13 days before tomorrow, the 18th. And 13 is the number of the families that were fighting, these Canaanite families, these royal families that are, really behind this secret handshake crowd with all their various clubs by different names and organizations, etc. Well, how many days is it from the 18th till Halloween?
13.
Let's bracket it again. This is a pivot day, a hinge day. Doesn't deploy the Marines for tomorrow, but they have to be on call from that point forward on a moment's notice to come in as reservists. They wouldn't go be deployed on the street. They would go backfill, and the active Marines that have been trained in doing stuff in the bases, they would go do anything that had to be done. These people would just, go and backfill at the bases primarily. So, is there stuff planned? I'd say that'd be a pretty good bet. So, how many people, when I said, a few months back, Linda, things were going to get plenty intense, that you were going to see stuff happening in the media and in Hollywood, and has stuff been happening in the media and Hollywood, as I said all the way back last spring. I said this summer and fall is about taking out the media. It's about taking out the mainstream news people, their ability to support this liberal Democrat Luciferian agenda, exposing them for who they are, and these Hollywood connections, etc. And I would say that has been happening very relentlessly and is continuing to accelerate, exactly as described. And then later in the year, this continues out with arrests. sequence to it. There is an order to it. There is a methodology, and you have to start somewhere. Personally, I'd like to see him start with the witch, and pretty close to it. I think Comey will be first, but these events are happening today. Is a hinge day, and we're crossing the Jordan and going after their stronghold.